Like base pay for the state is
Yeah, so that's cooler than anything else. And then you can, once you teach for 3 years,
How's it going? All right, so this clinic is going to be on low SES considerations. So for those of you online, I was just telling the people here, part of why we added this clinic is I do a little form so people can tell me their situation and what they want to learn about when they're here. And this was the most common thread was most people are in situations where they have a majority of their students that are considered low socioeconomic, lots of free and reduced lunch, lots of difficult situations at home. So I want to make sure we had a clinic devoted to that. The person that's going to be giving this clinic is Annette Mitchell. She and I have been friends for a very long time, and she's taught in a number of low socioeconomic situations by choice. She loves those kids. And when I first went back to teaching after being home for a while, I went to an inner city school, and she was the first person I called when I started getting stressed out, and she helped me with that. She's written articles for the website, and she just really, you'll be able to tell when she speaks about how she cares about the kids and how she's learned to really help students that need that kind of extra support in the band program. So, Annette Mitchell.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to apologize in advance because those sweet children that we're talking about, I have been working with all morning in an air-conditioned facility. So I just walked past someone that was like going, we're putting in a work order for the AC, and I was like, praise the Lord. Because 150 children in an unair-conditioned rehearsal causes me to be a little squirrely. So anyway, I'm Annette Mitchell. I have taught in low SES situations for 22 years. It hasn't been 6 yet. It's been 22 years. This will be starting my 23rd year. And I had no idea when I took my first job because they were like, hey, come interview in Plano. I didn't even know where Plano was, and all the Texas people laugh at me because I was not from Texas, and they were like, you're going to interview in Plano? And I'm like, I don't even know what that means. And I got there, and I'm so glad I didn't have any kind of a preconceived notion of Plano because the school I was at was anything but what Plano was considered to be at the time. We were the lowest socio group of kids. It was a lot of people moving from South Dallas that wanted to get their family to a better location because they care about what their kids are being exposed to, but didn't necessarily have the money to be able to afford to live there. And so I had no idea what Plano was supposed to mean, and so I was happy. I got in there, I started teaching, I started learning a whole lot about how to work with kids and angry parents as a baby teacher. My first really early on experience with a kiddo that had major ACEs that I didn't even know what ACEs were back then. I don't think ACEs were even a thing back then. Was we were in trombone class and I'm trying to help him get everything right, and he just lost his mind and threw a chair and like got up and walked out of the room, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know kids do that, you know. And so I had to learn really quick, and I had some really great support as a young teacher that would sit me down and go, well, you probably caused that. And I'm like, how do I cause a kid to misbehave? And actually I was the one causing it. And as she said, like, I choose to go to those low socio schools so much so that my district opened a new school this year, and they decided it would be smart to take all the lowest socio kids in the whole district and move them to the new beautiful facility that's not really new. It was the high school before, but much fancier and nicer and had better opportunities for the kids to learn than the old school. And I moved with them because I really felt like those are the kids that need me the most. And I knew that the kids at the other school were going to be fantastic and fine and have a lot more going for them without the need of my help. And they have been. So I'm now at Sherman Middle School. This will be our 2nd year. I will tell you, I was listening to some teachers talking about people leaving the field. And yes, we've had some music people leave the field, but I will tell you that at my campus alone, we lost way more in the other education departments than in ours. So I don't think it's necessarily a band problem at all. I think that the education system is needing some revamping, and I think it's coming because they're not going to have a choice, right? And I think in a lot of ways the band people are the ones that are sticking because we care about more than just that STAR test. And we don't have to teach the STAR test, which is great. So I want to start by kind of framing what poverty is, because poverty a lot of time, it's the po folks, right? It's kids with no money. It is more than that. Poverty is a chronic experience resulting from an aggregate of adverse social and economic risk factors. And that's from Eric Jensen from Poor Students, Rich Teaching. There's a lot going on there. It's not just they don't have money, because kids without money, they can still participate. Kids that have money but have a really, really crappy home life are still gonna have a lot of issues going on, right? There may be kids that have two parents at home, but home is a hotel room, okay? Those kids are gonna have just as many issues, if not more issues, than the kids that just don't have money. And I have a great example of one. I have a student, they don't have money, and I always knew when it was time for their money to come in, because she'd be like, we're going to the grocery store tomorrow. Okay, but this kid had a huge family support system. Dad had a job, they had a place to live, and so even though there was always that moment of like, tomorrow's payday and we get to eat, like, she's a stellar student, and you wouldn't know just seeing her that there's anything going on there. So I remind my students, and I didn't really have to do this year, and I've been kind of sitting here thinking about this. Most years, I always have a few students that are super emotionally driven about their situation. And this year, I didn't, and it was really weird. And I think it's because I've moved to a campus where everybody's kind of got issues, and I've never experienced that before. I've always been at a school that has some highs and a lot of lows. And now we're kind of like, everybody's kind of in the same situation. Now, each of their situations are completely weird and different, but it wasn't like this, oh, I don't want them to know. I also think COVID has had something to do with that, maybe. Like, we've all been through a lot of trauma, and so now all of a sudden, like, trauma's trauma, instead of being as big a deal as it used to be and something to be embarrassed about. But I do remind those kids that do clearly have some emotional issue about it, that are like embarrassed or afraid to participate. I remind them that their home situation is just a situation. It's not who they are, it's not who they're gonna be, it's just the situation in there right now. And it's not something that like is permanent. They have control over some things. They don't have control over home, but they do have control over the choices they make at school and what they do in my class. And so when they realize they have control over something, that changes the game for them. Because at home, they usually feel like they don't have control. And kids that don't feel like they have control, the first thing they do is come up with a way to have control, right? And that may be destroy class, okay? Because then at least there's something that I'm in control of. I can make that teacher mad. I can blow up this whole side of the class because they don't have manners, right? And so I let the kids know, like, you have control in this situation and you get to decide what we're gonna do here. And when they realize that there's more of them involved in what's going on here, all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, I don't want this to be like a disaster show because I have control here. So one of the things that I think is really important is their toolbox. Okay, a lot of the students that have two parents at home or have, like, there are some places I've talked to band directors, they're like, well, our children never see their parents, but they're au pair. And I'm like, wow, okay, that's a thing. Those students have tools that have been put in their toolbox for them, okay? And their parents or whoever their parents have raising them have taught them, okay, in this situation you're gonna do this, in this situation you're gonna do this, right? And so they come kind of preloaded. Now, they don't always use them correctly because I teach middle school, and our timing is terrible, and our choices aren't always like really great either. But we have tools in our toolbox, okay? And with my low SES and at-risk students, I think of them, they have tools too. They don't realize they have tools. So if you've ever seen one of those Gerber devices, they're like a multi-tool, okay? And you have more than just knives in there. You have screwdrivers, and you have pliers, and you have all these other things that kind of flip out in different directions, and they do lots of different things. And I think of my kiddos kind of like those tools. There's all these tools packed in here from my life experiences. I just don't know which one to use for this situation because I don't have all of these social skills. And I think more of the kids now, because of COVID, are like that, including our more affluent students, because they haven't had the opportunity to experience and use their tools. For my low SES and at-risk students, here's some skills that they have that they don't realize will help them in band. being the primary caregiver of their siblings. Because those are your best leaders in your program. If they have to raise their siblings, they're going to be the person you can have in charge of large numbers of kids and getting them to do amazing things without you having to do it and be on top of it. Working jobs at a young age. Okay, I have kids that have been working since they were 8 in their parents' businesses. Okay, family translator. Most of my kids are the family translators. And most of them are kind of shy about it. And so I've had to work at making them realize this is huge, this is fantastic. I make sure, especially during our 5th grade interview days where they come pick their instruments, man, those kids are on display working that day because they are my translators. And the parents that come in that speak no English, that are terrified about their baby starting band. And they don't know anything, and they don't know how much it's going to cost, and doesn't know how much time it's going to take. They walk in, and one of my little babies throws down, and I'm like sitting there like high five, and I'm like, yeah, that's it, buddy. I can't talk that fast. I know what you said, but I can't do it, and they would never understand it with my accent anyway. Like, they throw down, and the parents are just like, okay, we're home. And then the kid, of course, is like, oh, I'm okay. And so we've actually normalized it and made it where it's cool to be a kid that's a translator in our program. Other things, living in a variety of home situations in short amounts of time. Okay, those kiddos, though they are probably like shell-shocked a lot of the time, are probably some of the most flexible, creative kids in your program because they can shift to a new situation better than I can because they've had to. So all of these come with challenges though. If you have a full toolbox that's been stuffed and preloaded by your family or your parents or whoever they've hired to raise you, you may not know which ones to use, or you may be overloaded by how many of them there are. And so you may get flustered just trying to figure out which social skill to use here. If you're a multi-tool kid, you may not realize that the skills you have work in a different situation because nobody's ever introduced you to that. That's my job, is to introduce them to ways they can use what they already know in a new way. And this is something I thought was interesting. My husband is in the special education world, and he was working with a young lady who's in high school, and she was having a very hard time. She can't pass her math classes. And she was explaining to him, well, I'm stupid in math. And he goes, you're not stupid in math. And she's trying to convince him that she just doesn't get it. And he like brought up, well, if you went to this store and you needed to get X number of or you needed to get food for your siblings, and you needed all of these supplies, and she could rip it out right then. She could tell him how much it was going to cost, how many things they needed, what it was going to take to make it. And he goes, you're not dumb in math. You have never used math the way we use it at school. Okay? And she can do math in her head that most of us would have to sit there and pull out our calculators for. So in either case, you've got to teach the students what tools they have and how they can use them to make them benefit you in band. Because the cool thing is when they benefit themselves in band with their tools, are they going to use them elsewhere? And then you're sending that out into the world, and you're sending them out with better skills. Outside of school, most of my kids are raising their siblings. Very few of them are the baby of the family. Thank goodness, because the baby of the family is always the hardest one to work with. So when I've gotten through all the siblings and I get to the little one, I'm like, oh, all right. You're the one that everybody else has been doting on the whole time, so they're always the specialist one, right? They have been working jobs, and a lot of them are working jobs now, even in middle school. So you can imagine what that's going to imply when they get to high school and they have marching band. If they've been working jobs since elementary and middle school, and then you look at them, I'm sorry, honey, we have marching tomorrow. That's going to be the end of it. You've got to figure out how to work around the fact that they have jobs, because those jobs aren't for them. Those jobs are to help pay for their fame. And then lack of parents. My young lady she's always hungry at the end of the month, but is a fantastic student. She has a dad, mom's in prison, but she's being raised by dad and grandma. So she has a fantastic system, but the mom is the one that's missing. And I guarantee, she played this beautiful solo this year. She went up and they were like, man, you're awesome. Your mom must be so proud. And I'm like, oh, and you could just see her I'm like, her dad's really proud of her, and so is her grandma. And she's like, Right. But you have to know these things about the kids, right? And the person meant completely well. She had no idea. And if this had been in our band room, she would have been like, Mama's in prison. But not in public with people she didn't know. So, lack of food is another one. This year, my assistant director, she just kept a drawer full of like candy bar, or not candy bar, but granola bars, fruit snacks, and things like that. And the kids knew. They'd just walk in and be like, I'm gonna be really good in class today because I need one of those afterwards. And her only rule was, you be a good member of our class today, and you know I have the drawer after class, right? And so she was feeding those children daily because they're hungry. So then let's talk about motivating, because this is the one, and this was actually when Tamara called me when she started teaching at that school. She was like, I don't know what to do. They won't. I have tried everything and they just won't. Well, you have to know their motivations, and the motivations are different. Okay, students with parents at home and very involved family members, grades are a motivator because they're going to get in trouble if their grades are bad. Punishment, threats of punishment, holy cow, that's horrifying, right? Being singled out, we don't like that. Okay, my kids couldn't care less about their grades. They're like, fail me. And they know that strikes fear in a teacher's heart, because teachers use that, well, you know, you're gonna fail, right? And you're like, got him. Except they're like, so, then what? And most teachers don't have an answer for that. They're like, oh, dang it. And then that kid's going, got him, right? And so grades are not a motivator. Grades can become a motivator once they care about what you think. Yeah. But they have to know how attached you are and how attached they are to you before they care about that. So if you throw grades at a kid that you don't know very well, forget it. It's not going to matter. Punishment? So, I get in trouble all the time, right? My favorite, and this is one that used to be used in my building all the time, teachers yelling at you. These kids get yelled at all the time. They think a speaking voice is yelling. So if you're yelling at them, they're like, oh, it sounds just like my mom, I can tune that out, right? So yelling doesn't do any good. Anger just tells them, hey, I got them. And then being singled out, that doesn't motivate them. They don't like it. In fact, I was at one school where if you got singled out for doing something good, it was the worst thing in the world because you're a try-hard. Nobody wants to be a try-hard. Try-hards are the worst thing ever. And if you're in an affluent school that has a low SES group, you need to pay very close attention to those kids because they don't want to be the try-hards. They don't want to be associated with those other kids that are mean to them. They don't want to be that. And so you have to teach them to want to be a try-hard in your class. And I'll tell them, like, I won't tell anybody else. It's our secret. We're all going to try hard in here, but it's our secret. What happens in band stays in band. Pretty soon they want it to happen elsewhere too because they like it. Things that are motivating. Food. My group this year, not so much food. My assistants groups, food for sure. Belonging. Knowing that there are people that are like, they're people and that they're not on their own and alone. Group competition. They love competition, which is crazy because they don't want to be the tryhards and they don't want to be singled out. But competition, forget about it. Like, I'm gonna win, right? Family and friends. And if they don't have a family, those friends become even more important. And then it depends on the group, but awards sometimes. And I say that because this year I was struggling with my new group. When I moved to this new school, I made a really quick realization. These kids in our previous campus, who I had taught before, had been so suppressed by our students that were in the middle and upper class that they never spoke. They would speak to me separately, but they never spoke the rest of the day. And so when we started the school year, there was no, like, the building was like crickets all the time. And they would come in the band room and there was no sound. And to get them to talk was like dragging it out of them. And I would try all these different things that I know are motivating to kids before, and they'd be like, mm-mm. And I'm like, what am I gonna do? So one day I finally got so frustrated, I created a survey for my band because I felt like we are getting so far behind because I can't find the key for this group of kids. And so I created like a little survey and I didn't put it on their little computers because I wanted this to be something they had to physically express themselves on. And I put a whole bunch of different things that would be motivating for most people, and then I left a whole bunch of blanks at the end. And I was like, tell me what motivates you. Pick as many or as few as you want. The biggest motivator in my band program was their friends. And I knew it, but I didn't really think about that being the number one thing. Like, I'd be like, yeah, of course our friend. No, like what their friends thought about how they played and the support that they got from their friends was more important to them than food. In fact, food was one of the last things that they put on this survey. Grades was down there with food, right? And that didn't surprise me at all. But this one, like friends, was by far and away. The second one for this group of kids was awards. Okay, and I've never been at a school where they wanted awards. They're usually like, do not say my name. I've literally had kids that I'm like, hey, I'm gonna give you an award, and I know they announce these at lunch so you can go get ice cream. Is that okay? And they're like, don't you dare. And so I literally had to go to the principal and go, all right, my friend here gets this award, needs ice cream, please don't say their name over the intercom at all, or I will never be able to get them to do anything for me again, right? Well, this particular group is like, we love awards, bring the awards. I'm like, okay, who knew, right? But if I hadn't asked and done that survey before, I would have never known, and I would have probably been struggling to the very last day with that group. Instead, that group, we turned it into a game, and I had already planned on doing like a pseudo Olympics, because it was an Olympic year, and I always do Olympics by sections, right? Well, I was like, oh. All right, everybody stand up. Go find your 5 closest friends in this room. And then they became their Olympics teams. And all of a sudden, it was like, a few of them were like, oh, this is lame. And then pretty soon, one of their friends was like, dude, if you don't hurry up and get those scales turned in, I'm gonna come in here and make you do them. And I'm like, right? If you don't get your UIL music passed off, like, do you need help? Is that what it is? Let's go, right? And so all of a sudden, my pass-offs are getting done. And they're like, I give them a few points if they try it. I give them a whole bunch of points if they complete it. I give them like massive points if the whole team does it, right? And so then it became a, dude, you're the one that hasn't done it, and like we need the 10,000 points for everybody finishing it. Okay, and so we went from this band that I was like, I just can't seem to get in their heads. Like, we're having fun in class, but I can't get in their heads. To the only band in our district that got straight ones at UIL this year. Okay, and those UIL ratings, those don't matter to me a whole lot, but it was pretty darn cool to go from this group of kids that we couldn't quite even get our arms and legs to cooperate to being a group of kids that went on that stage, and this was probably the coolest part. We're in the warm-up room, and usually with my low SES kids, they're like, we're gonna go play, and people are gonna be judging us, and they're like having mental meltdown. These kids were sitting here going, hey, the echo in this room is pretty cool. Can we play this spot right here, because we just need to go through it one more time. And I'm like, you tell me, what do we need to do in this warm-up room? And we went on stage, and instead of having the looks of terror that they have when they get on a big stage that they've never been on before, in a school district they've never been to before, with the hot lights and the 3 old dudes, they're like sitting there, they didn't even notice there were 3 old dudes up there. They didn't notice the lights. They were like getting everything adjusted and like checking on their friends, making sure everything was right. And like when we were playing, they're like, wait, I can't hear over here, let's adjust some things. And I'm like, this is amazing. Like, these kids were so dialed in and in tune with each other as humans that I was like, doesn't matter what the ratings are at this point, because these kids are on a totally different playing field as far as being humans. Okay, and I, like, when they played, I was like, this is gonna be fine, because they were in the, thank you, she had to sign back there, go preach. They were in the zone, they were working together as a team, and these babies, like, it was a mess at the start. Now, our building by the end of the year was a mess because they have put the hardest kids in the whole district together, right? Okay, and they had to take 2 schools worth of teachers and split them in 2 different locations. And so a lot of these teachers didn't know what to do. And so they're like struggle bussing all over the building, and the kids are destroying our building everywhere else. But man, you walk down to the band room, and our kids are like, you're not in band, you can't use our bathroom. No, you're gonna take our soap, get out. No, I know about that TikTok thing, get out. You know, and so like our soap was our bathroom was the only one that had soap this year because our kids would be like, you don't belong down here. Right? And so it became a thing, and we actually have band and orchestra right next to each other, and it became a thing. Like the band and orchestra kids were like kicking everybody out because it's not cool if you don't know how to handle yourself, right? And these are the same kids that when they got to be had no idea how to handle themselves, but now they do. I got off topic, but it was kind of on topic too. Here's something that I think is important for you to know about these kiddos. It's important for you to know what's happening at home. Not the details, not the scary, gross stuff, but just like about their family situation. For instance, I've had kids, I have a girl specifically, she's in high school now, but she would come in and look at me and go, I don't know why this is important, because when I'm older, I'm gonna be married, I'm gonna be working 3 jobs just like my mama, and my husband's probably gonna be on disability just like my stepdad who beats her. And this was what was in her head. And it took a long time for me to get in there to find that out. But she really had already visualized herself as becoming her mother, and that was just her only option, right? It's just to continue the trend. You are, as the teacher and the music teacher, it's really the music teacher. As the music teacher, you are the one that can interrupt that plan better than any other teacher. You can interrupt that plan. Thank you. So your job, and I'm charging you with this now, even if you teach affluent kids, your job is to be the one that interrupts the trajectory of these kids that don't have a plan for a good trajectory, that expect to just be the victim of what's coming at them because that's what they've seen. So here's some things that shouldn't matter about teaching these individuals. And you can think back to a TMEA or TBA a couple years ago. The parent's income does not matter. It does not affect what kind of band member they're gonna be, okay? Does not affect their ability to learn music. It does not affect their ability to succeed, okay? Their living arrangements does not matter. I have had more kids living in hotel rooms or in cars that were some of my very best players. None of that matters, okay? Their likelihood to move, though it sucks because it happens a lot, that shouldn't be the thing that stops you from being able to work with that student or put them on a certain instrument or make them successful. You need to work every bit for the time you have them because you are the thing that stands in their way of just a lower trajectory, right? For whatever time you have them. We have, my school in particular, we have the children's home for the state right there. So the kids that can't be placed with a foster or don't have family to be placed with and they're trying to figure out where the children can go, they live in the children's home right down the street from my school. And so they'll walk into the counselor's office that first day that they're dropped off by the van, which I call their limo, and their driver. So when their driver drops them off in the limo that morning, they walk into the counselor's office and the counselor's like, all right, what elective do you want? And I cannot tell you how many times I've had a child walk in and go, I heard the band's good, and they've not played an instrument. And the last one that we had, they walked in the month before the end of school. Said, we have a new one from the children's home. Never played an instrument, but I bet you can fix this, right? When's the concert? 2 weeks, you got this, right? Do you know that little man, he walked in and my heart just broke because he was the sweetest young man ever. And he goes, I hear it's safe in here. It's like, bud, it's safe in here. He's like, I will play whatever you want me to. I'll learn it. I'll do it. Okay? So I was like, all right, I'm going to figure this out. And we put him in our third band because it was the only way I would work in his schedule. I'm like, all right, we're going to play this piece that has ride cymbal. And we have another piece that plays triangle. And another piece that plays, I don't even remember, it was like cowbell or something. You got to have more cowbell, right? And so I legit taught him how to play it, and then I showed him the music. And by the end, he was playing other kids' music because he had figured out what that part that I had shown him, how that works. And it was amazing. And he was like, every day, biggest smile. And he would walk in and give us the biggest hugs. And the last day of school, he went, I'm going back to my mom's house. And it was the coolest thing. He was like, I will never forget you guys. It was awesome, okay? And if I had been that band director that was like, no, we don't take kids the month before school that have never played before, I don't care where they're coming from, where would that kid be? Like, what would he have done? And instead, because I've been working with that home, I can go, hey, can y'all call the driver and see if they'll pick him up late because we have a rehearsal after school? And the cool thing is I know that the answer is yes because they're required to say yes, okay? Just like the foster parents are required to allow them to participate in things like if they want to play soccer, they play soccer now, right? If they want to be in band, they're going to be in band now. And so I know that I can get people to drop them off. Another place that becomes an issue is when we have a football game and they have to be in, like they have a curfew that's 9 o'clock, okay? And we also have the housing authority. We also have the women's shelter. We have all of it on our side of town. And some of those places do have a curfew. And those kids need to be able to come to you and go, all right, our building's curfew is 9 o'clock. And you have to be like, okay, so at 8:30, you're gonna make sure that the driver is up here and we wave at you and we see you with the driver and you're good. Right? They have to leave because the thing about those places is if they're not in before curfew, they're locked out for the night. Okay? And we don't want to do that to them or their parents. The women's shelter it's a battered women's shelter and they're all in hiding. We've had 3 of those kids come in this year and they come in for a while and then they leave. And it's devastating when they leave because we become so attached to them. But man, you better believe we find an instrument for them and we get them involved with the team because they need that more than ever right then. Things that we can do as a teacher to make this work. Because if we're not thinking here, we're gonna have that little Tremont kid throwing chairs at us in 6th grade. Okay, because I didn't know anything then. So we've got to lose the deficit lens and come up with the how can I help them be better, be more? How can I lay the groundwork for their success? Okay, the first one, and this one took me a long time, y'all, I'm not even gonna lie, procedures, and I call them that. Like I say, we need to go back to our procedures today, and they'll, oh, sorry, our procedures are lacking, okay? And our procedures start like this. You come in the band room, I don't care if it's silent or not, let's be honest, a silent walk-in doesn't do any good for that rehearsal. And my dad was my middle school band director, and I swear if you took a breath after you walked in the band room, you were in so much trouble that you weren't gonna see it for the rest of your life. Like it was over, right? I don't care if they come in talking, because if they love band, they're excited to be there. And if they're talking, that's fine. Now it's how they're doing what they're doing while they're talking. If they're over here talking, that's not okay. If they're over here talking, getting their instrument ready while they're talking, that's different. Okay, and so if they're talking when they come in, it's fine, but are they getting ready and set in an appropriate amount of time? I set the time. In fact, I set a timer. They know when the timer's done, they better be warming up. I set a very specific individual warm-up for them, and I do let them warm up on their own. A lot of people are like, oh, those kids don't have the manners. Yes, they do, but you have to like give them permission to have those manners. So they have a very specific set of things that they do during their 2-minute individual warm-up, and they better have it done because when I'm ready to start, I don't want them playing on a cold instrument, right? And they know why. The why is so important. I was a Y kid and I wasn't a low SES kid. So those kids are gonna be even more the Y kid. Give them the why as to why you do things. When they get seated, their backpack goes under their chair. Because at my school, we don't use lockers. I don't know why. It's not fun for us, the band room, because then there's stuff everywhere. So the backpack has to go under their seat because otherwise I'm clumsy. I will fall and probably break my hip and kill someone. Okay, and so they know everything has its place. You have your binder, it's open to this, your pencil's on the stand, and we go through these procedures. The first day of 6th grade band, we call lock day for a reason. We learn how to use a lock because that's the first step of coming in the band room each day. You gotta go to your locker and unlock it, right? And so we refer back to lock day a lot of times. Like, do you remember lock day? We gotta go through the order. And so you have to have a set of procedures that works for you, that's not hard, that you do every day. And every time they lose it, and I think this is really any band room, but especially for my kids, every time they lose the procedures, you gotta start with procedures and make sure they remember. They haven't forgotten, they just got lazy. We all do that, right? Okay, then you've gotta be consistent. Okay, things that are like go as expected are safe. These kids need to feel safe. So if it's exactly what they're expecting, they're feeling safe. If you throw something new at them, expect class to be a little bit wonky that day. For instance, we're STAR testing. We need you to move to another room today. Whatever you say, okay, I'm a team player, right? But know that those kids are gonna have a hard time that day. Probably need to start with procedures, right? And then they need positivity from you. And that does not mean, my husband and I got into a discussion about this in the car the other day. Positivity doesn't mean you can't joke with them. Positivity doesn't mean you can't use sarcasm. They love sarcasm. They love joking with you. They love picking on you. Here's what they don't love. They don't love you picking on them if you don't have a relationship with them, because that's not picking. That's being mean. And once you've been mean to one kid, all of them are done with you. And so what I do at the beginning is I don't pick on kids. Even if it's a kid I know, I don't pick on that kid in front of the class. I pick on myself. I make fun of me. I make sure it's okay that they know they can make fun of me because I don't take myself too seriously. Then maybe I do know some of those kids. Maybe I know them from siblings. So when the rest of the class isn't around, I start joking with that kid. And then I'll start joking with that kid in class when they all know that we have a relationship, right? Then you'll find this funny thing happens. There'll be a few more kids that want you to pick on them. And then pretty soon, picking on kids becomes a reward. Weirdest thing ever. But my kids actually want me to pick on them. So I have to use that very carefully, because if they're not acting right, I can't pick on them right now, because then they're gonna be like, oh, all right, I'm doing a good job. No, I pick with the kids and I joke with the kids that are doing a good job, because now it's a reward to get picked on, okay? They're not being mean, we're playing. But we all know that in advance. And you can't do it if the class doesn't know you well, because then you've just annihilated your relationship with a lot of kids, okay? And you have to have a safe and supported risk environment, okay? And this is huge for us in band especially. Like, you have to be able to play in front of other people and not be afraid to play, right? And not develop all this performance anxiety. Performance anxiety comes from being picked on when you weren't ready to do it in front of people, right? And somebody made fun of you. And so now we've got to make it where it's cool to mess up. And we're all going to learn from it. And we can cheer for each other's mistakes as much as we can for our successes, okay? So, as a teacher, I've got to have the best pedagogy. And here's 2 reasons. 1, I want them to be the best players they can be, and they can be. They can be better than anybody else's if I have the right information. But number 2, these kids can tell the difference. They can tell if you know your stuff or if you're pulling it out of a dark cavern, right? And if they know you're pulling it out and just making stuff up, or if you're shooting from the hip because you're not prepared for class, they're gonna know and be like, I don't take you serious. My kids know that I know what I'm talking about, and I'm not ashamed to go, you know what, I don't know that answer, or I'm not comfortable showing you that, let me go talk to my friend. And they know that my friends know stuff. They do, and sometimes, like, if I can FaceTime that friend, they're like, oh, you know, because now they're in front of somebody that has to be famous because they're a genius, right? Okay, and so that's kind of like, they have to know that you're giving them the best information. You have to set high expectations. These kids are not afraid of high expectations. They are afraid of failing, but there's ways around that. You just have to teach them what failure really is. And so you just need to, like, set that bar exceedingly high. And when I set the bar, to be truthful, at the beginning of the year with this new school, knowing what I knew about who I had, it was my 3rd and 4th band had become my 1st band with a whole bunch of beginners that I'd never taught because they'd been at a previous campus, because we went from a 5-6 and a 7-8 split to a 6-7-8 with the lowest kids together, right? And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna keep my expectations where they've always been. And then we'll adjust as needed, right? And I had people going, you really shouldn't do that because you're setting yourself up. And I'm like, but if I don't, then what? And you know what? Those kids achieved everything that my kids had achieved at every other campus I've ever been at in the first year that we were open, and then some. And so now the kids are looking at me going, Ms. Mitchell, we played 4 different festivals and UILs, and we never got a 2. We're gonna have to work harder next year. And I'm like, you're right. I've never had a year where we didn't have at least one random 2 somewhere mixed in there until this year, okay? And so that was kind of like mind-blowing that, like, if I had done what other people told me I should do for these kids, like, we wouldn't have been where we ended. You need to speak their language. And I say this to teachers all the time because I get told this. I got told this by an assistant director. Well, you have some sort of magic that I don't have. I'm like, magic's not real, right? Magic's not real. That's Harry Potter land, and that's fun, but that's not real. I don't have magic. It's how I talk to the kids. First of all, I know their language, okay? I have taught at a school where the kids didn't speak English. So me speaking to them in this very white ladies talk, you know, with very proper English, they didn't understand it. And I actually offended a very, very highly respected clinician that goes around our state that everybody like adores. I adore her. And I offended her really greatly in one of my rehearsals because she came to work with them and she was speaking to them and they're all looking at her like deer in the headlights and she didn't notice. And I could see them like there was just like this, I don't know what she's talking about, but I want to do good, but I don't know what she's saying. So I started paraphrasing every time she would finish, and it totally offended her. And I tried to explain to her later, I was like, I'm not being disrespectful. They weren't understanding you. Well, I don't understand why they're not understanding. Because you don't know how to work with my kids. And that's okay. You have a wealth of knowledge, but they don't speak your language. And that was actually when I came to this realization, I had always been doing that, but I didn't realize I was doing it. Then I went to a school where everybody speaks English, maybe their parents don't, but all the kids do. And they have pretty high vocabularies. And it was like, wow, so now I've been in 2 situations that are equally tough, 80% low socio, 90% at risk, and it's not the same at all. And so now I've taken a step back and now I'm in a school where fewer kids speak English, but the ones that do have really high vocabularies. And a lot of them are much more into TikTok and speak like a TikToker. And so I have to be able to speak their language, which I found out my principal is going to be using TikTok as an educational tool this year, so I'm gonna have to learn TikTok now. And I'm old, but my new assistant director is 21, so I'm gonna be okay. Here's the other part about their language. You have to talk with them, not at them. Okay, and this is the mistake that all these teachers that think I have magic make. They talk at them. They're telling them what they need to do instead of asking them and like conferring with them. And this last year, this is how intense my school was. They assigned a behavior specialist to our campus for the non-SPED kids. Because they're like, this place is coming off its rocker and we've got to figure out how to handle it. And her job was to come in, assess these children in their classrooms, come up with teaching tools and help the teachers figure it out. So she comes to me the first week of school and says, I have these 2 sweet children, and I didn't know who she was at this point. I have these 2 sweet friends of mine that are in art right now, and they really want to be in band. And they're just a little too energetic for art. And I went, good, I need some trumpet players. And it already sounds like they probably fit, and I looked at both of their faces like, this will work. And she's like, you want them in the same class? And I was like, why not? And she goes, go for it. And I'm like, okay. So I bring him in my trumpet class that's already full of rowdy young children because it's trumpet, right? If we get it right, they're gonna be the goofballs of the building. And so these 2 come in and they sit down and we get them going and we're going, and she comes to observe my class and she's sitting back there like, and I'm like, what's going on? She's like, I'll talk to you after class. I'm like, okay. So I'm like, hey, what's going on? And she goes, I've never seen these two behave. And I'm like, then why did you bring them to me? She goes, because the principals said they'd handle your class better. And the principals were literally bringing me children from art all the time, going, this kid's a band kid. And I'm like, okay, no problem. And so, you know what? Some of those turned out to be some of our best band kids. Part of it was because they were in art and they were bored. And they needed an outlet, and they were being expected to sit down and draw something, and it wasn't noisy enough. Some of them just needed a situation where they felt like they were in control, and they were going to take control. And in trumpet class, I was giving them control. And so all of a sudden, these kids who had been apparently terrors all over the building, in fact, one of them wound up at DAP later, they were fantastic for me. And she would come check with me, and actually she started coming to watch my classes to figure out what my magic was. And she would sit through some of the times when I would talk with these kids, because I would pull these two children in and just have conversations with them on their level, like I'm their age. And I know a lot of teachers are like, oh, you can't talk to a kid like they're the same age as you. Sure you can. Why not? They're not used to that. It freaks them out when you talk to them like they're an adult. It freaks them out, because they look at you like, what? What are you talking? And I'll always look at them and go, other teachers don't talk like this to you, do they? And they're like, it's because, dude, you're in my class, and you're a person, and you're important, and I need you to know you're important, but we got to do this different. And then that's the end of it usually. That's the last thing that I have to say to them, because then they're like, Mitchell, whatever you want, I'll do it. I will throw my life down. If you're on fire, I will spit on you until it's out, and I will throw you and roll you. I like whatever you need, right? Because I don't talk to them like they're dumb, and I don't talk to them like they're little kids. So be willing to get outside of your comfort zone, because what works for you may not work to make your class do what you need it to. Get outside your comfort zone. If all else fails, play games. Okay, and Tamari has come up with tons of games that are amazing. And it was when she was like, they did this, and I tried this, and I tried this, and I tried this, and nothing worked. And I was like, have you played games with them?
It was at the end of the year of being at that school when I started making games, and that's when we started putting stuff on Teachers Pay Teachers, because we needed different ways to teach the same thing.
Yeah.
So.
And they need repetition, don't they? All kids need repetition. But the ones that are the hardest to make a connection with are the ones that need the repetition the most. And they're the ones that get bored the easiest, so you have to give them the most variety. And that's why I love her games, because I can pull one out and go. And I've taken her rhythm stuff, and I have all these Ipsy bags. And so each kid gets to go get an Ipsy bag, and they pull them out, and we play games with those little rhythm cards. And they love it. So the other thing, and this is kind of my biggest one, goal setting. They don't know how to set goals. Let's be honest, middle schoolers pretty much don't know how to set goals anyway. And low SES kids, if they do set goals, what they're going to do, and I draw this on the board. This is like the first lesson in our band rehearsal every year. Okay, here's what I'm capable of doing. So here's my goal. Did I get any better? But I was a success, right? I achieved. I should get my gold sticker because I said I'd be able to do this, and I did. But that's where they're comfortable. And that's, if they know they can do it, that's their goal, right? So I ask them, all right, that's kid C. Now what if kid B knows that they can do this, but they decide to set it a little higher? It's like, what if they don't make it all the way to their goal? Did they fail? And they look at me, because it's like I have just messed up their minds. Like, have they failed? Or are they better than kid C? They're like, well, they're better. It's like, but they didn't achieve their goal that was up here. Are they a failure? Well, they're better than kid C. And I was like, then they didn't fail, did they? No. It's like, who failed? Oh. The kid that does what I always do, right? It's like, now what happens if you've got kid A? Kid A's like, I secretly want to get here. I said, this, for my band kids, I tell them, this is making first chair all region. Now, we all know that making first chair all region is like a luck situation, right? Because you can practice your tail off and be perfect at it and still go in and blow it. Or still go in and have that other kid that plays it slightly faster with more dynamics, right? And so I'm like, what if you set your goal way up here, first chair all region, and you don't make all region? but you learned all the music and all the scales and can play it all. Did you fail? And they all look at me, well, I didn't make first chair. And I'm like, but you can play all this stuff, so now we can play cool music. Did you fail? And so what we have to do is reframe failure for kids and reframe goal setting. And I actually have a sheet form. It's like my safe goal is this, my stretch goal is this. And then I have this like hairy mammoth thing. It's like my crazy out of reach goal is this. I call it the crazy, amazing, scary goal. And you know what's amazing is the number of kids that can reach that scary goal that they thought was never possible. Because they're never, like, most of them are too scared to really go for it. Okay, and so setting those goals, and then you have to go back and discuss it with them. Because they're like, I'm done, and they don't learn from it. Okay? So, here's your ultimate success test at the end. Do your kids love the band room as much or more than their home? Some of them, it's probably way more. Do the kids push themselves to try hard, even on new things? Because a lot of kids are very scared about new things. And that's not just the low socio kids, right? That's like a lot of the kids these days. Do your kids take pride and ownership in your program? Do they help other kids? Do they feel like they have the ability to go help other people? And making sure that your band achieves at a higher level and in the future. And do you have kids that want to share the love of music with others when they're older? Okay, those are the real tests, not that UIL rating, because that UIL rating happened once and it's over. That UIL rating doesn't help me next year at all, does it? Okay, and my walk away at the end of this year, I was looking through this going, wow, some of this really doesn't feel like it fits right now. But you know what? In about a month it will, because we have to start over, right? And it's like, fresh set of kids. So it's kind of really good that we're doing this now, because I can be like, okay, reset, because that UIL band is now in high school, and I'm going to have a fresh set of children looking at me like, you want me to what? Right? So I appreciate you guys so much and letting me talk about and ramble about my favorite thing. But I hope this has been helpful. And
Someone online
I'm
mentioned
always
how, like, this is stuff for everybody too, right? Not
Yeah.
just low socio.
Yeah.
This is like how to care about your students and be a good teacher. Could be the other name of this clinic
Yeah.
as well. So,
So.
thank you.
All right. Thank you. Awesome.
All right, these people here are going to run very quickly to director's band. We will try to be back
Oh.
on at 4:30. If we're not on right at 4:30, we'll be set up as quickly afterwards as we can. 4:30 is a rhythm beat clinic.